All right, we're back here, and this is now part two. A little bit of a hiatus. Mark had a UPS delivery. Anything good, Mark?
Not sure what's in it, but I ordered some stuff on Black Cyber Monday from Amazon, so it's something from them.
All right. Well, so we were talking a little bit about the luxury tax before we took that quick break. And just to summarize before we go into some of the next points, you were saying there was an order involved, and right now the Red Sox are at, looks like 224, call it 225 million for committed salaries. They want to get below 208, so it's about a $16 million trim they have to do. And you were saying that in terms of timing, you're going to look first to trade away either a David Price or a Nate Eovaldi to trim that money. And if that's unable to happen, you might be forced into looking at a Mookie Betts or JD Martinez trade. And with that said, I think one of the main topics we wanted to cover was to get your temperature on the likelihood of a Mookie Betts trade, because I think Mookie, I mean, he's one of the more beloved players in Red Sox Nation. I mean, he's a five-tool player who was an MVP 2 seasons ago. And I don't think anyone wants to see him leave. What is your current temperature on that?
I think it's unlikely at this point, but it's definitely still going to be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about it, any team that's looking to get Mookie Betts on a one-year deal, that's going to be a contender.
Yep.
I mean, you can immediately cross off the Yankees. So really, it's just whatever other teams are going to be contending besides the Yankees that would be interested in the potential trade.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, those teams aren't going to want to give up a ton of prospects if they're only going to have them for 1 year.
Yeah.
Unless they somehow knew that they were definitely going to be able to re-sign him. And I mean, the Red Sox have had some negotiations with Mookie Betts, and it sounds like he wants to be one of the top paid players in the game.
Yeah.
And he's kind of planning on going into free agency in order to figure out exactly how much he can get.
Mm-hmm.
So unless the team came out there and just gave him like a Mike Trout level extension, I think he's going to become a free agent and just try to get the most that he can. And because of that, I think teams are going to be wary of giving up much in terms of prospects for 1 year of Mookie, especially considering he's going to have a pretty high salary for 1 year.
Right. So, I mean, if you're not really going to get a lot of prospects in return, you may as well keep him and see if you can re-sign him at the end of the contract.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, even though he's been saying all along that he wants to go to free agency, he's still given every indication that he's willing to re-sign here with the Red Sox and that he likes it here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just that he wants to make sure that he gets every dollar that he can with the Red Sox or whatever other team makes an offer.
And you can't blame him for trying to do that and, set his family up in the future. I think, too, with some of these players, some of these smaller built players like a Mookie Betts, we saw it with Andrew McCutchen, and I think we're seeing it with Jose Altuve right now. It's hard to give them the monster contracts just because the smaller build players seem to wear down faster over their careers versus someone like, a Bryce Harper who's built like a moose. He can last a long time. And even when he loses a little bit, he still can add a little bit of pop and RBI potential to your lineup.
Yeah, I agree with that. Pedroia is even another good example there where he's broken down.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of agree. Like, I'm a little bit against giving Mookie like a 10-year deal at the top salary.
Yeah.
And even if they didn't trade him this offseason, if the Sox turn out that it looks like they're not going to make the playoffs, they can still trade him mid-season before the trade deadline. And if you think about it, at that point, the acquiring team, they'll have an even better idea if they're going to be making the playoffs, and they'd only be acquiring, say, the last 1/3 of his salary. So you could probably still get a similar prospect haul in mid-season compared to what you would get in the offseason.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, it looks like you may as well hold on unless you're really being motivated by the luxury tax threshold.
Yep. And then I would say the only way something kind of just comes up and happens is if a team like the Atlanta Braves or maybe like the LA Dodgers or the Cardinals, if they just offer like a ton of prospects for them and they just go all in on re-signing them. Because I know the Braves, they have tons of young prospects, even pitching prospects too.
Mm-hmm.
And they have plenty of payroll space, and they know they're a contender with a bunch of young studs. You got like Ozzie Albies and a bunch of other guys on their team. So you have to watch out for that potential where that team just reaches out to the Red Sox themselves and they say, we want.
Right. So let's say they do wait it out on Mookie Betts and they wait until he gets to free agency. what sort of team? I mean, like for a Mike Trout-esque contract, there are only so many teams that can actually dish that out. I mean, I would imagine it would be the Red Sox, the Yankees, Dodgers. It's hard to even think beyond that. Like maybe the Braves you mentioned, Atlanta, do they have a high payroll?
They don't. So I think you're talking about the right teams there. The Red Sox, Yankees, and Dodgers. Those are the three teams that always have the bigger payroll. The Mets also just got a new owner, I believe, and maybe a new GM. So you have to keep an eye on them just in case they're looking to all of a sudden go up and splurge on a big player.
Mm-hmm.
But with some of these other teams, like say the Braves and the Cardinals, they don't necessarily have the biggest team salaries.
Yeah.
But those are smaller markets where they might be willing to sign one player to a mega deal to make that player the face of their franchise because they know that around that one player, they're going to have a bunch of cheaper players.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why a team like the Braves, they might be willing to go out there and give a huge contract to Mookie Betts because they know they're not going to ever be anywhere near the luxury tax threshold anyway.
Gotcha. So kind of like how the San Diego Padres went out and got Machado last offseason.
Yep, same as that, and not too much different than the LA Angels where they signed Mike Trout to a huge deal.
Yeah,
he's the face of their franchise. That gets the fans showing up at the ballpark. But then around him, like they didn't really have any other big high-priced players.
Mm-hmm. Well, good to know, and I'm glad to hear that it's not looking too likely at this moment in time that Betts will be traded. I would like to see them make a long-term investment in them, but I agree with you that I'm not so comfortable with like the 10-year deal, like the Bryce Harper type longevity, even with these bigger players. It always seems to end up killing you at the end of the contract.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, just look at Pedroia doesn't even have the average annual value that Mookie Betts would have if you signed him. And you're seeing at the end of Pedroia's contract that we just had a discussion. I mean, it is kind of a hindrance to them getting under the luxury tax.
Yeah, and I think that goes back into like the big market club versus the smaller market club. It's almost harder for a big market club like the Sox, Yankees, or Dodgers to sign someone to a mega deal because you're always going to be near the luxury tax threshold.
Yeah.
So you're always going to be focused on like how can I get under it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a smaller club and you only have one high-priced player, it's not going to matter down the line 8 years from now if Mookie Betts is washed up because they're not going to be anywhere near the threshold. And
right.
they'll just accept the fact that, all right, we're not going to be a contender for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Red Sox, like they're trying to be a contender every single year.
Yeah. Which, especially with that fan base and the amount they charge for tickets, they certainly should try to contend every single season.
Yeah, and I saw my season ticket package, the price even stayed the same as last year, despite the fact that we missed the playoffs.
Oh, wow. I guess, from the Red Sox perspective, staying the same is giving the fans a break.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right. Well, we got through the luxury tax calc and some departures and some of the completed moves. Let's say they do get under it and they're looking to add to their team. Let's talk about your target list. And we've gotten through the catchers. You talked about Martin Maldonado. I can't say his name. Alex Avila. At first base, you have a few names listed. I don't know if you want to go through some of them.
Yeah, sure. And like I was saying, I think, and this is just my opinion on like what my strategy would be, but I think they have to trade those high salary players first to get under the threshold, so that way they can determine, all right, how much money do we have left to spend to fill out the rest of the roster?
Yeah.
And the rest of that roster is really going to be like your backup catcher. They're going to have to figure out what to do at first base and second base. And then if they were to trade JBJ, they'll have to replace him. So that's really only 4 spots on offense.
Mm-hmm.
And then for pitching, they'd have to theoretically replace someone like David Price, replace Rick Porcello, who's going to leave via free agency, and then round out the bullpen.
Yeah.
So getting into first base, I'd kind of like to look at first base and second base together here. So we mentioned that Dustin Pedroia, he's not going anywhere. And the new Red Sox GM was even saying, like, Dustin Pedroia, I talked to him, and he's planning on playing next year. If I'm him, like, I'm going into the season assuming that Pedroia is not going to play a single game just because he's been injured for a couple of years now. And I think you just can't plan on him actually being healthy. Oh,
absolutely. You can't rely on him. It's fine. He's there, and anything you get from him is a bonus. But I couldn't agree more. You can't rely on him at that second base spot.
Yeah, and that's what frustrated me last year because Dombrowski was kind of talking throughout the offseason saying Pedroia is going to be our starting second baseman. He's healthy. He's ready to go. And I was kind of like, what do you mean? Like, you can't just assume he's going to be ready.
Right.
And Dombrowski actually literally just assumed that Pedroia would be fine, and then he wasn't. And then they had to go with guys like Brock Holt and Marco Hernandez. Eventually, Michael Chavis came up.
Mm-hmm.
So what do the Red Sox have left at first base and second? At first base, they have Sam Travis, who's a righty. He's out of options, so you can't send him down to Pawtucket. I'm not a fan of him at all. I think he's a pretty horrible hitter.
He is.
He's very bad defensively, so he's a bat-only prospect.
Mm-hmm.
He just has not hit at all at the big league level in 3 different stints.
Mm-hmm.
And then at second base, they have, we talked about Marco Hernandez, but he's going to be starting off in Pawtucket, so he's nothing but depth. They do have a utility guy, an infielder/outfielder, Zue Lin, and he's a really good defender, and he's fast and can be a solid pinch runner.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not a good enough bat to be a starter, though. But I think with him also being out of options, I have him penciled in as one of the utility guys. And he could end up being your Brock Holt replacement because Brock Holt and Mitch Moreland, 2 of my favorite guys, they're free agents.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely possibilities to re-sign with the Sox. I would say if Brock Holt is re-signed, then Zue Lin is probably going to be traded.
Gotcha.
And then if the Red Sox are unable to re-sign Brock Holt, I think they would simply go with Lin as their future utility guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there. One of the positives to keeping Two-Way Lin as your utility guy is he's on that pre-arbitration deal at that $555,000 mark. So to your point, it's cheap, Yep. Might be a little bit easier to hold on to than Brock Holt.
Yeah, because Brock Holt, he's not going to demand a big deal or anything, but the rumor is he could get something like 2 or 3 years at $4 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's why I think the Sox have to get under first to see how much they have left. Because let's just say they get way under and they have plenty of room, then I think you can go ahead and sign a guy like Brock Holt for $4 million. But if it turns out you might be cutting it really close, then I think you just go with Lin for like $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
The other good thing between first and second when we're losing Mitch Moreland and Brock Holt is that we have Michael Chavis, who is able to play first base and second base. So I wouldn't even pencil him in at either position. I would just see, what ends up being the best fit at first or second among the available free agents and see who you get, and then just put Chavis at the other position to fill it out.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I agree with that.
So the guys I had on my target list for first base, Mitch Moreland, obviously, who I'd love to re-sign. He's I'm a big fan of him. CJ Cron, he's been around the league with the Rays and the Twins. He hits a bunch of home runs, and he's a right-handed bat. Then you have Greg Bird, a lefty who the Yankees cut. Matt Adams, a veteran lefty who's available probably for pretty cheap. And then you even have Travis Shaw, the former Red Sox, who is a lefty, can play first base. He also is eligible to play second and third, which I think is extra valuable because you can kind of go with whatever combo you want between Shaw and Chavis at first and second,
Mm-hmm.
or you could even use them as a platoon in some form. And they could actually both play third base, so they could even be the backup in case Rafael Devers had a long-term injury.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have to think about, are these guys going to want to sign with the Red Sox? We know Mitch Moreland likes it here. Travis Shaw actually was on a podcast with Rob Bradford, I think, this morning, and he openly talked about how he would love to to come back to Boston and be part of our team, and he thinks he's a good fit there. So I think Travis Shaw is definitely a big name to think about because he could be had for pretty cheap.
I would be all over Travis Shaw. The last we saw of him, he was having a great start to the season. I remember it must have been 2016 or 2017, but he played really well for us. And, with the position flexibility. And the other thing about Travis Shaw is he's another lefty bat. And I think a lot of our power bats are righty. Outside of Devers, we don't really have another lefty power bat in the lineup. And I think that's something Shaw could provide.
Yeah, exactly. And then the only other name I had there was, sorry, the doorbell just rang again. Eric Thames, who is another left-handed hitter, and he's also eligible in left field.
Mm-hmm.
1 second. I'm just going to answer the door real quick.
we'll put Mark away for a second while he gets ready. Turn him down. He'll be right back here. He'll message me when he's back. Definitely some good insight Mark's provided there, and I think one of the more valuable things is going through the luxury tax threshold, seeing how much money they might have, and then from there deciding where you're going to go, because there are a lot of players we think we want to get. We all want to re-sign Mookie Betts, but unfortunately there are those financial restrictions that the Red Sox have there. All right, he's back. We'll get him back on the speakerphone. A lot of deliveries today, Mark.
Yeah, I don't know why, but these Amazon deliveries are coming in one by one instead of all this. Yeah, I guess so. To round out my whole idea for first and second base, I think if they determine that they're going to have enough money or more money than they initially thought, they should try to go with platoons at first and second, and maybe even one of the outfield spots if JBJ gets injured.
Yeah.
Because I would love to go with like a combination of Travis Shaw / CJ Cron at first base,
mm-hmm.
and then maybe go with like Michael Chavis / like Brock Holt at second base.
Mm-hmm.
So all those guys, they're going to only cost like a few million each. So that's why I would kind of love to get like all those guys just to build a ton of depth and have the ideal lineup. But if they're going to come in really close to that luxury tax threshold, then they might just be able to only get like one of those guys,
mm-hmm.
and then go with like a typical backup, like a Sam Travis to back up at first base, or Zue Lin at second base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the more we talk about this, the more it seems like the big fish to fry is David Price, because if they do save a lot of money there, it's just going to end up improving the rest of the roster tenfold. And yeah, you lose one of your top two starting pitchers, but it's not as if he was like super consistent last year to begin with.
I know the Texas Rangers, that's one of the first teams that has shown interest in acquiring one of our starting pitchers.
Okay.
So to keep an eye on them. It seems like if it were to work out with them, they might be trying to dump a contract back in return. Maybe someone like Sin Chu, or maybe even Nomar Mazara.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good to know. All right. Well, I think one name we had listed that you didn't bring up was Eric Thames, left fielder. Was this more getting like outfield support in the event you trade JBJ?
Yeah, exactly. Because if we trade JBJ, they're probably going to go with Benintendi in center, Mookie in right. And then at that point, the only guy left in your roster that can play the outfield is JD Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
So, they could just use JD full-time at left, but if they did, they'd want to make sure they have a backup.
Yeah.
And then if they just kept JD at DH, you're going to want someone out there in left field. And I think Thames would be a good fit just because they could play him in left against right-handed pitching, and then maybe against lefties, JD shifts into the outfield and somebody else plays at DH.
Mm-hmm.
And he also was able to play first base in case he worked out there.
Okay. Good to know. All right. Moving, you have a couple of infielders you listed as well. We've talked about Brock Holt. Unfortunately, one of your others, Howie Kendrick, signed this morning. So the last one to mention is Cesar Hernandez.
Yep, and he's a guy where he was actually due $11 million in arbitration by the Phillies, but they cut him.
Wow.
I think he's kind of like pretty similar to Brock Holt in that he's going to hit for a decent average, a little bit of power. He's, a good base runner and all that. I think it's unlikely we'd end up getting someone like him, though, just because he's probably going to be looking for a decent salary.
Yeah.
But other than those few guys, there's a ton of other options left, but they're all like on the very cheap side where they're just pure utility guys.
Mm-hmm. All right. Moving to the outfield again, you have another outfielder listed, Domingo Santana.
Yep, so he's a power hitter. He got cut. I think he had 30 home runs a couple of years ago, so he was one guy that I thought could be a decent fit as like a part-time outfielder, maybe even combined with someone like Eric Thames in left field. Not known for his defense, but I think if Benintendi moved to center, keep Mookie in right, I think the Sox can get by with like not the best defense in left field, especially with the Green Monster there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one guy who I've identified who I would love to get in a trade is Jose Martinez from the Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, they kind of reduced his playing time because they were frustrated with his defense. And he's a guy who can play first base and outfield. Again, not good defensively, but he's got a great bat. Like he can hit around 300. with decent power, and his salary going into the next couple of years is only going to be $2 million.
Oh, I like that.
So with that cheap salary, the fact that he can play first base and left field, and you can kind of like hide his defensive deficiencies in front of a monster, and the fact that the Cardinals were open about looking to trade him, he's definitely someone I would be looking at.
Mm-hmm. I like when the salaries were quoted are right around that 2 million mark or lower after our luxury tax conversation.
Yeah. And then one thing, I guess, going back to the first baseman, I think someone like C.J. Cron, maybe he can get like 3 or 4 million. Matt Adams, he's maybe only going to get like $1 million. Greg Bird might get $1 million. Travis Shaw might get like $1 million or $2 million. And then, like, even though I like Mitch Moreland better than all those guys, he's probably going to be looking at like $5 or $6 million.
Okay,
which isn't a huge difference. But if it turns out they need to pinch pennies to get under 208, that's probably why they take a slight downgrade from Moreland to some of those other guys.
Mm-hmm. I think the last position we haven't really talked about was starting pitching, and you mentioned before that with Rick Porcello leaving, and then if we are looking to trade away a David Price, we do need a couple of arms there, and Brian Johnson's not gonna be a regular starter for you. So who are you looking more in the free agent end? I don't think they have a ton in the minor leagues right now that could call up for starting pitching.
Yeah, this is what I think is going to be the toughest one to figure out. So for the free agents, you've pretty much got a couple elite guys like Steven Strasburg and Garrett Cole. There's just no way they're going to be able to afford those guys. And then there's a second-tier guy, or a couple like Zach Wheeler, who already signed for over $100 million. Madison Bumgarner, who's looking for $100 million. They're just not going to be able to get those guys. And then it seems like after that, there's a huge drop-off, and it's just a bunch of like number 5 type starters.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them, they're the type of guys where they're number 5s, where they don't have upside to be really much more than that. And to me, like, that's not the best use of our resources, is to get guys that are simply going to be a back of the rotation guy.
Yeah.
And that's why I identified a few guys that got non-tendered because the teams didn't want to pay them a big salary in arbitration. And those few guys, the names that popped out were Aaron Sanchez, Taijuan Walker, and Kevin Gausman. So those are guys who are still pretty young, and they have potential to be a little bit better than what they've been.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also still not really proven. I wouldn't sign 2 of those guys because that would add too much volatility and risk to the rotation. But if they can get one of those guys for the number 5 spot, I think that would be a pretty good idea, because you could get them for cheap, and they'd be willing to sign here for cheap because they know that they'd have a spot in the rotation versus being like a depth guy.
Right.
And they have the potential to maybe eventually hit their potential and be like a middle of the rotation type of guy if everything panned out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other guy I identified, Rich Hill. So he's injured and he's like 40 years old, but he's from Milton, Massachusetts. He's been on the Red Sox before for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's someone where he's probably going to keep it simple at this point in his career and either re-sign with the Dodgers or sign with the Red Sox. And he's someone where, since he's injured, it sounds like he wouldn't come back until June or so.
Yeah.
He might be a decent guy to sign to a 1-year deal for, let's say, a few million,
mm-hmm.
knowing that when he's back from his injury, he has the potential to be like a really good pitcher.
Yeah, he's always effective when he's healthy. It's certainly the health has been his number one, troublesome item in his career. But while he's been on the mound for both the Dodgers and the Red Sox there for a little while, he was very effective.
Yeah. And then other than that, like the real only other options left for starting pitching would be trades. And I think that's something that the Red Sox will definitely be exploring, especially where they're looking to trade away players. Maybe they can get someone back to be like a number 4 starter.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, we're coming towards the end of the target list. You even have some Japan postings. I don't want to embarrass myself by pronouncing any of these guys, but are there any in particular you want to discuss that you thought would be, are any of these guys potential contributors for this season, or is it more of like a minor league stash type deal?
So there's been 5 Japanese players who've been posted. And I wanted to point this out just because I feel like this is an opportunity where the way it works when you sign someone from Japan is you sign them to the contract, but then you have to pay a certain amount on top of that goes to the Japanese club that posted them.
Mm-hmm.
But that amount that goes to the Japanese club is excluded from the luxury tax purposes.
Okay.
So I kind of looked at this as like this is a potential where they can save a little bit of money if they want to sign someone to be a part of the club, maybe like a relief pitcher or a part-time bench player, where you could sign them and their entire salary is not going to really be affected for the luxury tax.
Gotcha.
I mean, it is going to be like a little bit risky though, just because you don't really know if they're going to perform at the big league level.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, like these 5 guys, you have one guy who's a right-handed starting pitcher, another one who's a left-handed starting pitcher. If you were to sign one of them, I wouldn't pencil them into the rotation, but maybe they would be set up as your long reliever / spot starter type guy.
Okay.
And then one of them is a second baseman who doesn't really hit for power or anything like that, but he's a Gold Glover.
Ooh,
so
I like that.
Who knows? Maybe he's a fit as a bench player. There's another one that's a center fielder, and they look at him as a leadoff type hitter, or a guy who can steal bases and hit for average, but not hit for power.
Okay.
So if they traded JBJ, he could be a solid fit there. But again, if you were to get someone like that, I wouldn't rely on him to just be the starting center fielder. I would get someone to platoon with him just in case.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last guy who I really like, I forget which one it is, because they all have similar names here. I think it's Yoshitomo Tsugo.
There you go.
He's a first baseman / left fielder, and he's a big-time power hitter. He's been hitting 30-plus homers a year.
Nice.
So that would be kind of someone similar to the Eric Thames, where, like, if JBJ is traded, you're going to need an outfielder. We know we need a first baseman. Why not get someone like him where he can potentially help out a little bit at both positions?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Awesome. Well, I had one other player I was going to ask about. I'm going through your document right now, and I can't find him. You'll probably remember his name. I'll just embarrass myself live on the podcast. But that outfielder we signed for a ton of money back in the day, and he's been in our minor leagues, and we haven't brought him up because he might hit the luxury tax. What was his name again?
Rusney Castillo.
There we go.
Part of the new Woo Sox, the whole Red Sox thing. Just kind of, I don't like that name. But
so I always ask about him because I heard that he was playing pretty well last year, but it just seems like a money issue, right? Where they just can't bring him up because his big contract would immediately hit the luxury tax.
Yep, exactly. Like if they were to call him up, all of a sudden that's like, and this would become permanent too, because the loophole has been closed now.
Yeah.
But if they called him up even for a single game, his $15 million a year would count towards the luxury tax for the remainder of his contract. And I think this is actually going to be the last year of his contract.
Okay.
And I know you were saying like, oh, he has been playing well in the minor leagues. I mean, like, he's been okay. Like he's been hitting around 300 for the last 3 years,
mm-hmm.
but he doesn't walk. He doesn't really hit for power. And he's one of those guys where like he is fast, but he doesn't steal bases either.
Gotcha.
And I think he's at this point where like, yeah, he's been hitting around 300, but that's because he's been playing for 5 consecutive years in AAA.
Right.
And he's in his 30s, so he's 32.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's just one of those guys where like he's not going to be anything at the big league level.
Okay.
He could be a backup outfielder for some team at the big league level, but he's not someone you're willing to pay $15 million to do that.
Yeah. So maybe we see him surface the following year as a backup outfielder somewhere in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, possibly.
All right. Well, I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? We definitely got through all our topics there.
Yeah, I guess one thing. So to let people know what I do during the offseason, I have 3 websites that I click through. MLB Trade Rumors, that's my favorite one where I try to go on there every day. There's even an app for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that just has pretty much like every rumor, they gather it from every different source, like whether it's Twitter or ESPN. And it just pops up right on that app or on that website.
Nice.
And even on my app, I have it set for the Red Sox where there's one tab where it'll just show me any Red Sox rumor or update.
I'm going to write that down.
Yep, it's MLB Trade Rumors.
All right.
They even have an NFL version too.
I'll be all over that.
Yep, and then there's also Sons of Sam Horn, which is like a Red Sox, it's like a forum. And I don't post on there, but I go on there and read it just to see what other Red Sox fans are thinking in terms of like what they should do this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one that I like is Sox Prospects. So that lists out like all the Red Sox prospects. It gives you a quick scouting report on all of them, shows you their minor league stats, and it also has stuff such as like how many more times they can option them to the minor leagues, like what guys' salaries are.
Oh, nice. Perfect.
Yeah. And then my favorite in terms of looking up stats is Fangraphs, just because it shows the regular statistics, the advanced statistics, and you can even look at charts like spray zones and stuff like that.
All right, good to know. Appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for joining us. And we hope this isn't just a one-time thing. Throughout the offseason, we'll do it maybe periodically after some big moves or whatever. Do a quick catch-up. But we really appreciate the insight, and we'll have you on again.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for having me. That was fun.
For sure. All right. We'll talk to you later, Mark. And for everyone on the stream, we'll see you next time. Thank you.